Welcome to everyone. Pleasure to see you. Just a quick update. Mildred Crump, our fearless leader, is still recuperating from her fractured hip. It's a day-to-day thing. We're hopeful to have her back by next month. The show must go on. I'd like to introduce Rabbi Capers Funet from Chicago, who's made a year-long commitment to our program and helping us, helping enlighten us as we move forward toward a more just society. Rabbi Funet.
Thank you so very much, Eric, and good evening to everyone. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce Mr. James C. Williams IV. He is the FSHC's Director of Racial Justice Policy. He joined the Fair Share Housing Center in 2019 after working for Philadelphia Works and previously New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. Mr. Williams attended Fayetteville State University in North Carolina, where he received both his BA and MS degrees. He has been an advocate for civil rights and social justice throughout his career. I'm indeed very honored to introduce Mr. James C. Williams IV. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi. And I commend you. So many people don't know how to say Fayetteville. So thank you for getting my alma mater right. I appreciate that. That's a big time win for a little small school in North Carolina. Good evening. It's a pleasure and honor to be before you amongst a collection of like-minded people. And I'm thankful that you guys could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with me this evening. So that lets me know that you care about these issues, you care about our great state of New Jersey. Oftentimes the conversation around civil rights and social justice is relegated to African Americans, but throughout the history of civil rights in this country, we've known that the Jewish faith and the Jewish congregation has walked lockstep with many of the other faith leaders. So it's only fitting that we're having this conversation today. I am James Williams. I'm the Director of Racial Justice Policy, and my work is squarely forged around the intersection of civil rights, social justice, and housing. I'm very biased in the fact that I believe that housing is at the nexus of where we can start our most impactful civil rights work here in the state and also in the country. If we look historically, one of the key pieces of legislation that Dr. King got done before he was assassinated was the Fair Housing Act in 1968. We launched a campaign at Fair Share Housing called 1968 Continues, because we squarely believe that there were many, many issues that have not been addressed from that historic piece of legislation that we need to address here today. New Jersey is a dynamic and complex state. We act as what many call as the big suburb for New York and Philadelphia. We have a lot of transient people that live here in the state that make this state their home, but they move and operate all throughout the country, if you will. So we see cost of living is extremely high in the state. I just conducted an interview with WHYY, and in a survey, it was identified that if someone worked minimum wage, that person would have to work 3.5 full-time jobs to afford a 1-bedroom apartment here in the state of New Jersey if they only made minimum wage. I want to run that back to you. 3.5 full-time jobs if they made minimum wage just to afford a 1-bedroom apartment here in the state. How can we expect people to thrive? How can we expect people not to be homeless? New Jersey, as we know, we lead the nation in foreclosures. So what does that say about our ability to offer affordable housing? What does that say about our ability to offer people a livable wage and what cost of living looks like here in the state? We have one of the highest racial wealth gaps here in the state. If you met Ryan Haygood, my former CEO and colleague and friend, you know that white New Jerseyans right now have a net asset worth of about $265,000, as compared to our Black counterparts that only have about a net asset worth of about $5,000. $265,000 to $5,000. So we see that we're dealing with a lot of fundamental and dynamic issues here in the state that are driving what we call housing. As it pertains to Fair Share, we are a historic organization. In 1970, we brought before the New Jersey Supreme Court what has come to be known the Mount Laurel Doctrine. That mandates that every municipality here in the state has an affordable housing obligation. Now, before that case was, before now, that case was important because that case had to do with a Black woman in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. In that township at the time, the mayor went to a Black church and stated to that congregation, if you can't afford to live here, you need to find somewhere else to live. These were individuals that lived in Mount Laurel. And for those of you that are New Jersey natives, you've known that Mount Laurel was not always this affluent, bustling kind of suburb. It used to be a very rural area. These were indigenous, what I call indigenous Black Americans that had built that up. They worked the fields, they worked the crops. They actually made that town what it is today. And the mayor told them, you aren't fit basically to live here. You don't meet the town aesthetic. Now, marrying that in now to that affordable housing obligation and where we are today. Housing, how important is affordable housing as we recover from a global pandemic? People have lost wages. People have had reduced wages. If we don't want to see New Jersey become not only number one in the nation for foreclosures, but number one in the nation for homelessness, affordable housing needs to be to the forefront of the conversation. On June 18th, the governor signed the first bill of its kind in the country, a ban-the-box bill for housing. The idea that housing and the criminal justice system were married together is a deplorable act. You've paid your debt to society, so why do you still find yourself paying a debt as you try to find yourself fundamentally moving forward? How can you live that new invigorated life? How can you actually be a reintroduced citizen if you can't have access to housing? And for those of you that have worked in housing or know people that are returning from formerly incarcerated people, housing is fundamentally essential for their success. You ask somebody that's returning from prison or from incarceration, they'll tell you housing, employment, and services. And most will tell you that if you give me somewhere to live, I won't go back in. So we helped to get that bill passed on Juneteenth. The Governor Murphy signed the first in the country that singular piece of legislation. So we're trying to work with the governor now to sign a rental assistance bill, once again, recognizing that if we don't put something in place, if we don't put dollars into New Jerseyans' pockets, we're going to not only lead the nation once again in foreclosures, but in homelessness. There is a massive wave of evictions on the way. For those of you that are in the Essex and Newark, in the Essex County area, many of you, I know the synagogue is up in Newark. Back in March of last year, there were just in March alone, 65,000 eviction filings, 65,000. And unfortunately, many of those individuals that are going to be affected by these evictions are going to be people of color. They make the least amount in the state. So New Jersey is working to get through not only the pandemic, but also kind of, we want to create a new New Jersey. We don't want the old New Jersey of foreclosures. We want the old New Jersey of racial wealth gaps. New Jersey also leads the nation in disproportionate incarceration rates, 12-1 for Blacks in the state, 22-1 for youth in the state. So there's a lot of things that New Jersey needs to get right. And coming out of the pandemic, we can't go back to business as usual. We need to try to introduce new philosophies, new ideologies, new policies that are going to bring people the kind of relief and the kind of help that are going to allow New Jersey to be the diverse kind of collective state that we are. We're the most densely populated state in the country. We have a lot of people living here in New Jersey, with a large majority of those people being renters. Affordable housing needs to be that stepping stone into generational wealth. How do we close that racial wealth gap? How do we allow people to buy homes in areas that have high equity so that me, myself, one day I can pass a home that has value onto my children, and they don't have to find themselves paying exorbitantly high rental rates. MSNBC actually just did an article on Jersey City. I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to read it, but there was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath in Jersey City. Monthly rent was $4,300 a month. I want you to wrap your head around that one more time. 2-bedroom, 1-bath in Jersey City, $4,300 a month. How is that cost? You know, how do we expect people to thrive in New Jersey? How do we expect people to live with those kind of rental rates? Now we understand that Jersey City is, very quickly becoming like the suburb of Manhattan, but how do we make that competitive for, once again, the indigenous Jersey City people that have been living there all their lives? I'm a Camden resident. I live, I can look out my window and I live literally in the shadow of Philadelphia. How does my city, called for decades the most violent city in America, how do I and my residents compete against Philadelphia as some of those members start to find their way over into my city and take advantage of a lower cost of living? The rabbi that introduced me, he's a Chicago native. What does Chicago look like? What does cost of living in Chicago look like? What does gentrification look like there? How do we stop these urban areas from being exodus? For African Americans, that word is so important to us, right? Because we saw that once freedom was quote unquote given, we saw what a massive exodus. Chicago, you guys can trace your exodus route to Mississippi. So New Jersey, we're coming from that Florida, Jersey, North Carolina pipeline. They made their way up. Chicago has that Mississippi, Texas, Alabama kind of line. So where do we go now if there's a mass exodus now? New Jersey, I often joke, but I don't know if you guys noticed, but there's the Atlantic Ocean right next to us. Unless, New Jerseyans plan on becoming Atlanteans, we can't go east. So where do we go? Where do we go if there's no place for us to live? And that's just not a Black issue. That's an everybody issue. People are trying to create that livable wage. And what does that livable wage look like? 3.5 jobs, full-time jobs that you'd have to work under our current minimum wage. That's a staggering amount of work. When you think about the sociological effects to that. So we say that, all right, Eric is going to work those 3.5 jobs. Eric is a father on his own. What does that do for Eric's children? Would we be surprised if Eric's children become part of the juvenile justice system? We shouldn't be. He's not able to parent. All he can do is provide. When you look in our urban areas and you say, like, why are so many of these young people going into our juvenile justice system? Because parents are doing what they can to provide. They don't have the ability to actually parent because they're working so much. I'm a product of that. I was fortunate that my mom got me involved in everything she possibly could. Debate team, political science club, mock trial, football, track, the band, you named it, I was in it. My mom and I lived in Camden. She left every day at 6 a.m. to go to work in Atlantic City and came home about 6:30, 7 o'clock. I did the math. That's almost 8 days of unaccompanied time that I would have without my mother in the city of Camden. Many of you are familiar, Camden, Newark, Trenton, are brother and sister cities. How do you ask a young person that wants to stay out of their criminal involvement with that much unsupervised time? Each and every day I'm walking home to local drug dealers. Hey, young boy, you need anything? Hey, little fella, let me help you out. There's the draw. And all that goes back to housing. All that goes back to that mother, that grandmother, that father, that uncle, whomever, that guardian, doing their best to make ends meet to provide the rent. So here we are. In the wake of a global pandemic, recognizing that housing once again is going to be to the forefront. I think, to me, only second to recovering trying to recoup our healthcare system. If housing isn't to the forefront of this, if we aren't ensuring that housing is a fundamental pillar in how we rebuild society after this pandemic, I don't know if we ever will. particularly in New Jersey, where cost of living, where so many people are finding their way into New Jersey, and taking advantage of our prime real estate. I was looking at some of the, if you guys are tracking, there was a huge spike in housing here in New Jersey. In some areas, average cost, people were paying $140,000 over asking. Wrap your head around that, $140,000 over asking price. Now, for the seller, that's an amazing windfall. But how do you compete? How does that first-time homeowner fresh out of college, or that first-time homeowner that's transitioned from affordable housing, where they've saved up the money to put down that deposit, how do you compete against someone that can pay $140,000 over asking? So now here we are, right now, the bottleneck. Here we are, we're stymied, where we have a generation that's looking to make that next step and can't. We're having people that are looking to create that foundational pillar. That housing can be one of those foundational pillars for generational wealth. For African Americans, that's one of the key things that we can pass down to our families, our home. And hopefully it maintains some equity. But in some cases, for those of you that know people in urban areas, that's one of the few things that we have to do to kind of cover funeral costs and debt, because we don't have access to capital and resources that we find in other communities. So housing, not just housing, but housing that gains equity. We need to have access to the areas where housing actually is at a premium, where housing becomes an asset and not actually a liability. These are the things that we're looking for. So I talked with Eric yesterday. He said, James, what are those actionable items that we can talk about? What are the things that we can provide to our people that can actually go forward and do? One, I need to go to their city council meetings and make sure that your municipality is meeting their affordable housing obligation. If they are, challenge them to do more. Challenge them to do more. Challenge them to offer more affordable housing. Be an inclusive community, not just for African Americans, for all populations, for all like-minded people that want to better the community. The second thing that we can do is, and I'm backtracking, the second thing that we can do is, the two things, forgive me, is one is challenge, ask for more affordable housing. And our second thing that we can do is ensure that communities are no longer offering so many barriers to housing. Challenge your local landlords and developers and ask them what their housing practices are. Are you making credit scores a premium? Are you using criminal background checks, eviction filings? Are you putting barriers in place for people that have Section 8 vouchers? What are you doing to allow people to actually move into your area? So increase the affordable housing amounts. Second, reduce the barriers to housing. So we have tons and tons of affordable housing going up, but we have more and more barriers going up. So that's the insidious nature of what we understand to be discrimination and racism in this country. These aren't static phenomenons, they evolve. Redlining used to be a proverbial red line that, towns and municipalities used to draw to let people know like where the black to white town was. Usually it was kind of married along the lines with that proverbial like railroad track. We all know that saying from the other side of the tracks. That's where that red line used to be. We used to draw that red line and split towns and split, social economic demographics by that proverbial railroad track, that red line. So now we don't have red lines. What do we have? We have criminal background checks. We have credit scores. We have discriminatory practices where somebody can apply for a house in Maplewood and get denied, but ask that same landlord or that same developer and they'd be approved to live in Newark. How is that possible? How am I not qualified to live in Maplewood, but I'm qualified to live in an urban area? What that is hyper concentrations of poverty. I don't want you to get the advantages of living in Maplewood. I don't want you to get the advantages of having better school systems and better healthcare, better education, and better economic development. Because what comes with that is potential for generational development. Because that person that goes to school in Maplewood will one day become that college graduate that goes on to Princeton, and that college graduate that goes on to Princeton will come back, and then they'll become that productive member of society. And you say, James, that's not really happening. These kind of things aren't that diabolical. Yes, they are. These things are put in place are not coincidental. They're very, very intentional. They're very, very intentional. So capital, education, healthcare, these are all things that stop communities from growing. And I'm
James, we lost you for a moment. Rabbi Fune, I think you could add some really interesting insight here while James, there he is.
ensure that the affordable housing mandate in your community is being met. Second, make sure that the barriers to housing in your community are being diminished. So I'll stop there. Eric challenged me to be very candid, very transparent. I don't want to ramble because I'll stay on all night and might shed a tear and get my feelings. So I'll try to stop from doing that.
James, thank you so much. I think for a lot of us, I was mentioning to you the other day, this whole idea of municipalities selling off their affordable housing responsibilities. I believe that's no longer allowed, right?
No, that's no longer allowed. Those are called RCAs, so regional community agreements. So those are no longer allowed. But
the residual of that have those towns that were engaging in that, are they now getting up to speed in terms of fulfilling their responsibilities for affordable housing?
Yeah, that's one of the. So there are some towns that are just meeting 300 units with 290 market rate, with only 10 of those units being affordable housing. So they're finding a way to meet the bare minimum threshold for the affordable housing units. So most of the municipalities are fighting their very best to only build market rate housing.
I'm curious, when you froze, I started to ask Rabbi Fune, you had pointed out Chicago, which by all accounts seems like a really interesting housing market, difficult housing market. I'm curious your vantage point on that, Rabbi.
Well, Chicago really is a microcosm. One of the things to what is happening in New Jersey as well, particularly in the African-American community. The good thing, we're moving forward. We've increased the minimum age in Chicago to $15 an hour. And to some people, that's a lot who are making $7.50 an hour or $8 or $10. But in actuality, a drawback from people moving up and moving out of depressed areas, because $15 an hour is really not going to, if it's only one individual in the household that's working, that $15 an hour is hardly going to be able to give them upward mobility. But I was very interested when James said that it takes 3.5 jobs to live in New Jersey. And that's an interesting point, because it seems that what is the minimum wage in the state of New Jersey now?
It's not $15 yet.
It's not $15. So there's a minimum wage fight currently. So it's not $15. I think it's $12.50 if I'm not mistaken, but it's not at 15.
And Eric, I have some questions for James if I get an opportunity.
By all means, as soon as Rabbi Fune is finished.
When he's done, give me the opportunity to ask some questions from James. I'm sure he's got some good answers.
Yes, sir. Okay.
We'll go, is that Lynn? Go ahead.
Yeah. All right. First part of the question is, when a developer agrees to provide some units of affordable housing, do we still permit them to segregate those units like off in the corner? Get those people coming into what they used to call the poor door, or do we now require them to scatter those units throughout the project so people at least can have some self-respect? Where are we with that concept?
Thank you for asking that question, Lynn. That's you would think that's such a it's a great question, and to me, it's yes and no. So some developers are still, I hate to use the word petty, but I don't know, like they don't feel as though that affordable housing. So you have some developers that literally, to your point, try to build the affordable housing units as far away from the market rate units as physically possible, as physically
Okay.
possible. So in some of those cases, yes, we are relitigating to make the changes to those architectural plans. The ones that are already constructed, we just have to try our best that when that town does their next round of affordable housing, that they don't go about doing the same way. But you raise a great point that it's such a I don't even have the words to find a way to be so not petty, so exclusionary. Like, you don't believe that these people not even like deserve to live like in the same complex. Like it's not, in some cases we've had to relitigate because they didn't even want the buildings to be attached. They had market rate and then a whole separate building for affordable housing, almost like
I've seen that in Morris County where they absolutely define the affordable units segregated, and the people are not respected as full residents. To continue with my question, do we have a definition of the footage which is essential for per person? So that's necessary for decent living. So, which I think is necessary before you can even launch an attack against zoning exclusions, which is where the big battle is going to have to be fought. We're not going to be able to provide affordable housing until we get the courage to challenge these towns which block out people who need basic housing, so we can define what basic housing is. How much space is it? It's certainly not the 100 square foot that most of the world lives in per person. It's something other than that. But I don't know what that number is. It could be something like 400 feet in a unit. I don't know what the number is. But certainly before we can attack zoning and say, look, you've got to provide a certain number of units of basic housing in any development that you do. We're going to need to know just what that number is. And I don't think anyone has really done a study on that. All I know is I've been attacked as a landlord. I've been attacked for overcrowding units. That's where that comes into play.
Yeah, I definitely agree that identifying like what the physical space for what we would just see like a livable space is something that is not truly defined. So it doesn't need to be a mansion, but larger than a closet, right? So there's a lot of dimensions in between those two dynamics. So we just have to find what that looks like. So in we could provide what you're describing as a basic livable space for individuals to live humanely and safely.
Before we can go to a town and say we demand that you provide a certain number of units of basic housing space for a basic family, we have to know what that is. And I don't have that number. At least I can't provide it with any authority, put it that way.
Understood.
And the actual fight for zoning is going to eventually have to be fought. I know nobody wants to take that on. Everyone's scared stiff. All the politicians don't want to touch it. There is nobody who says we have to attack these towns which are using zoning laws to keep the people that we don't want out of here. That's a battle we need to fight. But it has to be, somebody's got to take it on.
So New Jersey is in the process of also redistricting. So I would marry rezoning with redistricting right now. So we look at where people live and where people vote are going to be almost symbiotic. So I would challenge Len, that rezoning is probably going to look exactly like what redistricting looks like. So the redistricting lines are being redrawn. That's what the rezoning, what a lot of the zoning maps are probably going to look like. So I think we'll have a template very soon as the state embarks upon its redistricting.
Okay, thank you. All right, Eric, I'm done.
You'll think of something else.
I just want to kind of ask another question related to the population of New Jersey. The state of Illinois, we've lost the city of Chicago, and the state we have lost a congressional seat. And before it's over, it may be 2 congressional seats that we're down. What this cost of living, particularly for rent in the state of New Jersey, is it driving population out, or are more people trying to come in and make their way? What's that situation like? Do you have any idea?
So New Jersey was always a densely populated state, but we saw an increase. So there was a lot of people that were actually coming into the state. So we saw a huge influx, particularly in New York. New York saw some of the highest vacancies in their rentals that they've seen in 20 years. And per moving companies and data collected by like Atlas Van Lines and like U-Haul and other moving companies, a large amount of those individuals were coming to New Jersey. So New Jersey saw, once again, the big suburb saw a transition from New Yorkers who probably wanted to pay a little less, but still have the access to the city. Because $4,300, you think about it, $4,300 is what we're paying in Jersey City. How much are you paying if you paying that same 2-bedroom in Manhattan? Probably can tack on another $1,000, $1,500. So even though $4,300 is an absorbently high amount, it's still better than $6,000, what you would pay in New York. So we're finding that New Yorkers were finding their way to New Jersey. I found that people in Philadelphia were finding their way over to Camden. So we're finding that some are making their way over into New Jersey, and now finding that even though our cost of living is high in comparison to the 2 larger metropolitan cities that sandwiches New Jersey, Philadelphia and New York, it's still cheaper. It's still less expensive. So COVID caused New Jersey to actually gain residents, as opposed to some states that actually saw a mass exodus. And little fun fact, the state that saw the highest amount of people move there during COVID was Iowa. More people moved to Iowa during COVID than any other state in the country. I can't say I'm moving to Iowa, but when I looked at some of the numbers, you can find out why. The cost of living is very low. I mean, the that you could get for what you're paying here in New Jersey, I mean, you could almost buy like 2-3 houses in Iowa. Beautiful, beautiful state, beautiful, beautiful land. I mean, the air just looked like, I mean, it just looked amazing. But I'm a Jersey boy, so I can't say I'll be the next mover to Iowa. But Iowa, just as a fun fact, was the state that saw the most people make the transition there.
James, Isabella has a question. I think you answered part of this, but what can we do to change segregation that still exists in so many towns? For example, West Orange, where, as you know, we live, a complex of luxurious apartments but also approved the affordable housing units. And they were proved to be in a much lower quality building in a very small lot without parking space, instead of requiring the affordable units to be in the same luxurious complex. One of the things that I read, I talked to Isabel about this. They were also, I'd never heard this, but you talked about it. They were suggesting that the affordable housing tenants had to go in through a different entrance. So, you know, there's a lot of levels. There's the pragmatism of being able to afford a home and the cost of it. But the whole point of that, to me, is the children that you bring up who live there feel good about themselves because the affordable units that they're living in are a organic part of this bigger complex, and everyone's the same and everyone's treated the same. So are there laws, restrictions about what the developers are allowed to do within a larger housing complex?
So yeah, we are the agency that does the compliance and the monitoring for all Mount Laurel related affordable housing units here in the state. So we are looking into that, but we are a single organization. We're a staff of about 12, responsible for all as you're describing, Eric, all these type cases all across the state. So it's really important for us to meet individuals like yourselves to challenge you to go to your municipal meetings and find out what's going on. Now, we don't expect you guys to be the litigators, but there are 526 municipalities in the state of New Jersey, 526. So we need advocates like you to let us know when those things are happening. So there are not particular, they are particularly weighed. They are in some cases, in some of the affordable housing agreements are violations. Some of the units that were built very, very early on, we're in the process of relitigating. So to your point, are there laws in place? Yes, we're working to rectify some of those issues. But some of these towns are tremendous amount of dollars to ensure that a lot of these units are not inclusionary. So yes, there are laws. And the secondary answer is it takes time for towns to correct those errors.
So if I was an attorney, which I'm not, and I spotted that type of grievance, it's not legally accepted behavior. There are standards in the Mount Laurel that require. Okay.
Absolutely.
That seems to be something that all of us in the suburbs can certainly pay attention to.
And that just goes back to Len's point where he was just describing the units that had, like, he described like some very egregious amounts of exclusionary building. But, in other cases where you find like, the units don't even look like the same or less than adequate living habits or secondary entrances. All these are definitely discriminatory practices that could be litigated and towns can be sued over.
I mean, it was offensive to read, and I got to believe that most people who I know would feel offended as well. So the in those situations, the best we could do is bring it to the Fair Share Housing Center's attention.
Absolutely.
I mean, what about using local attorneys? A lot of attorneys are supposed to do some pro bono work, I believe.
And just honestly, most either legal services or most even law firms, they'll probably refer them to us. We are the foremost authority on Mount Laurel doctrine. We are the kind of the steward of that legislation here in the state. So even legal services, if it deals with like Mount Laurel related settlements and things like that, they're going to send those individuals to us.
Thank you.
Eric?
Yes.
Rosemary.
Hey,
Um,
Rosemary.
Mr. Williams, what towns are most egregious? What towns are in your crosshairs?
Careful what you said.
Rosemary, you didn't pull any punches this evening. You just went straight for it.
I'm just
Um,
curious.
Oh, understood. I think the town that we're having the largest fight with, Englewood Cliffs. Bergen County as a whole, just to be transparent, is probably our most adversarial county in the state, Bergen County as a whole. So if I had to put a pin in a particular area, Bergen County.
That's what I thought, but thought I'd ask the expert.
No problem. I don't mind answering.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for asking.
Thanks, Rosemary.
Relative to the question that Rosemary asked, what are the demographics of that particular county that you mentioned, Mr. Williams?
Oh, wow. So per capita, Bergen County is actually one of the wealthiest counties in the country. A tremendous amount of wealth. You think about like civil service positions. I read an article not too long ago, like the average salary for police officers in Bergen County, like because of the cost of living there, and how much that county's makes is like $150,000 a year for a police officer. And police officers are supposed to be like some of our most inappropriately paid, disproportionately paid like civil servants, but $150,000 in Bergen County. But there's a tremendous amount of wealth in that county. So yeah, the demographic racially, primarily white. I think the average mean income in Bergen County is in excess of like 250,000. One of the highest homes in that county goes for in excess of 8 million. Average sale of a home is over $750,000. So very expensive county to live in.
So where do you start?
I'm sorry, in terms of
Tackling the problem of fair housing in Bergen County.
court, we win. I mean, this is a Mount Laurel Doctrine it's a constitutional mandate here in New Jersey. So these towns just fight really tooth and nail to really build the bare minimum. Not only to Len's point, not only are they looking to have the buildings separated, but they're looking to build them in like the most isolated parts of town. So that's a secondary piece. So not only do we not want a market rate and affordable housing together, but if we do have to build affordable housing, we want to build it as close to like the trash treatment plant or the city dump as we possibly can. So we go to court, and I can say that I probably work with some of the most skilled and knowledgeable attorneys. Like this is all our attorneys do. We don't do traffic. We don't do criminal cases. We don't do anything else but Mount Laurel. So I can arrogantly say that they are literally the best at what they do. So we go to court. It may take a little bit longer, but we do win. We do win. So litigation is our most powerful tool, Rosemary.
Thank you.
We have a raised hand. Isabella Friedman, I'm assuming has a question or a comment.
Isabella Friedman.
Isabel, you're muted.
Just to jump in what Eric said before, I went to this West Orange meeting and I saw this clearly, like that they put this unit far from the other building, which is like a bad location, no cars, parking spot for the residents at all, no provision for future environmental stuff, like for example is designing provision for charging stations for stuff like that. Then putting two together, when you see something like that, Should we contact you guys? That's the question. One.
Yes. Yes.
Question two is, and what about the environmental side of this whole thing? Because we are in the middle of the climate crisis, and we know that the most disproportionately affected people are exactly the minorities, Black and Latinos. How can you tackle both things together at the same time? Make sure that those buildings are not just being built in that sense, but also providing a quality health life for those people.
So we need to marry all of these issues together as like holistic justice and not parcel it out. So all of these things need to be happening in tandem together. So education, healthcare, the environment, economic justice, housing justice, criminal justice reform, all of these things need to be happening together. It does me no good to build you this luxurious house and I build it in a place that has dirty water and polluted air. It does me no good to build you this beautiful home. It does me no good if there's no jobs. It does me no good if it's poor educational system. So all of these things have to happen together. We can't talk about housing and then environmental justice, or environmental justice and then healthcare, because we live in a fluid society. Like I wish we could press pause, and stop one thing so we can do another. But all these things happen, together. So we have to talk about an excellent point. And I think that we need to all kind of always marry all of these issues together. If you're having a housing issue, let's talk about criminal justice reform right at the same time, because where you live is where you're policed, and where you're policed is where your kids go to school, and where your kids go to school is where you go to the hospital, and where you go to the hospital is where you work, and where you work is the air that you breathe, and that's the water that you drink, and that's the equity for your home. So all these things happen together. All these things happen together. So we have to talk about them as one issue and not separate issues. So though housing is a component, but these are all holistic justice pieces that we need to discuss. So excellent point. And I totally agree.
Thank you.
Thank you.
James, this is Jeff Havison. We, in addition to the issue of redistricting, we have all of these municipalities and school systems and police departments that probably should be merged. But part of the reason for having these small communities is to make sure that those people don't live in my town. And is there any work being done in the state to try and force? I mean, there are two Princetons there. Even in these very rich communities, there are towns that are 1 square block, and school systems. I mean, the number of superintendents of schools in this state, all of whom make high salaries. That's
New Jersey is
playing all of this.
I mean, absolutely. So New Jersey is probably like the perfect case study for what you would call northern segregation. We are the clinical definition of what you would look like when you talk about segregation. Look at our schools. New Jersey as a state is being sued because our schools are. I mean, you would literally, if you took the numbers out, you would say, oh, these numbers have to be from Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. Our schools are so segregated. So, if you marry schools, schools and housing, those are probably, your Gemini twins, right? Education and housing. Segregated schools, you're going to see segregated housing. So to your point, Jeff, I don't know how we get around the overabundance of municipalities. I'm a Camden resident. There's a municipality called Lynn. It's literally 4 blocks. It's 4 blocks. For any of you that are familiar with South Jersey, it's literally 4 blocks, and it is its own municipality. 4 blocks. It's like a carve out of just Camden. It's literally 4 blocks. So, you know, you see the same thing in North Jersey. Like you said, you have these towns that are 1 square mile, and they're their own town. I don't know how we get around the oversaturation of municipalities, but one of the things that we're looking to do.
The flip side of this is if you talk to people in the city of Newark and say, we're going to make a county-wide school system, among the people who would be fighting against that would be the people here in Newark.
And part of the reason with that is, you know, it's duplicitous. So, you know, how for some of those, you know, how do you know, for the parents there, how do you get your kids to some of these countywide schools? You know, that's the issue. So, you know, there's the additional, you know, weight of, you know, would there be additional cost for busing these kids to where these, you know, locations are going to be. So yeah, there is some pushback about that, and some of the parents just have concerns about, you know, how inclusive are you going to have the kind of curriculum that is reflective of all the students that are going to be incorporated in there. Because if you start that today, I mean, just in full transparency, the curriculum that you have in Maplewood and the curriculum that you have in Irvington and Newark aren't the same. So if we have this countywide school and this kid from Newark is now asked to compete against that kid that's from, you know, that came from Columbus, can that young person from Newark know the same information that that young person from Columbus was taught? In some cases, the answer, and unfortunately, a lot of cases, the answer is no. So, you know, we have to improve our urban areas and allow them to actually compete in some of these countywide schools and provide the necessary resources for parents that would have to have their kids kind of bus to those areas. Because we do know in full transparency, they're not allowing the kids from the urban areas are going to have to go out. They won't build the countywide school in the urban area. They won't have the kids from the suburbs coming to Newark. They won't have the kids from Cherry Hill coming into Camden. The kids from Camden are going to have to go out. So how do we provide the appropriate transportation for those kids?
On the other hand, Camden County and the city of Camden are an example of regional policing. How is that? Okay, actually, how is that whole system working out?
How much time do we have, Jeff? You guys have any coffee brewing? Because we're going to be here a while for that one. In a nutshell, on paper, it looks like an effective model. I have my reservations because for a countywide model, on paper, it says that the number of crimes are going down, but how are we reporting those crimes for a countywide model? So are we including some of the surrounding suburbs into the data, which makes it look like Camden's crime is going down, which on paper? So if you included, for Chicago's purposes, if you included some of the surrounding suburbs in Chicago's numbers, Chicago's crime numbers may look like they're going down, but in all actuality, they actually haven't. So in Newark, they have a consent decree. One of the things that I wish that they would do here in Camden, where we have a mandate for residency. I have a great cop that polices my area, but he's a Camden County police officer, but he lives in Bayonne. Wrap your head around that. A Camden County police officer, but he lives in Bayonne. And I told him to his face, I said, you know, you got to, different kind of kids go. You got different kind of kids nowadays. There's no way a cop from a guy from Bayonne is going to catch a kid in Camden. You don't know the way. You don't know your way around the city. I don't even have to do anything crazy. You just can't catch me. You know, and I was a youth here in Camden. I not proud of it, but I would tell the kid, you know, when I talk to young people, say the only difference between me and kids that went to juvenile detention facilities, I was faster than the cops. The only difference. But you got to be from this area to police these areas. You know, there's things in Camden, I would say, that only people in Camden would know. Places in Newark that only people from, Newark would know. You got to be from there to know those areas. You can't be from Bayonne telling me you're going to chase a kid down in Camden and really police. You don't know where you're going. So, and you don't have that tie, you don't have that connective tissue. On paper, it looks great. A lot of articles been out about how great Camden policing is, but I have my concerns.
Thank you, James, for your presentation today. It was excellent. We've never met, but I am Chief of Staff to Council President Crump. I have one question for you. Is there any area, town, city that you think is doing a good job to address this problem?
In affordable housing, and it's interesting. So as many of you are aware, the town of Mount Laurel was just on national news for an incident down there where they had a white resident, pretty much accost and verbally assault a Black HOA president. But as it pertains to affordable housing, Mount Laurel is actually doing an outstanding job. One of the synagogues down there, Rabbi David, works very, very closely with our former founder, Peter O'Connor. So Mount Laurel, that development named after the matriarch of the case, Ethel Lawrence, is a beautiful, beautiful development. School buses go through there. They just built a community center. They offer after school counseling. It's all included, market rate and affordable housing. So if I had to pick a town that's doing an excellent job, Mount Laurel is actually doing as it pertains to affordable housing. Now, obviously, with recent issues, they have some concerns that they need to do about their race relations. But as it pertains to affordable housing and a great model and what it looks like, Mount Laurel is actually doing a great job.
Thank you.
Thanks, James. Thanks for focusing some positive attention, James.
Eric, it looks like Elisa has her hand up.
Oh. Lisa, are you out there? I can't see you. Alisa?
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
So the for-profit developers, to my recollection, did respond to Mount Laurel. They were the hammer that forced towns to fulfill their Mount Laurel housing obligation by using what was called the builder's remedy. So they would force the towns, the municipalities, by suing them in court to comply with their Mount Laurel housing obligation. And they would then build a housing project, and they would have like a 1 to 4 set aside. And they, made money this way. So my thought is that, yes, in addition to legislating policy that we want in the courts, another pathway might be through federal policy to tinker with the low-income tax credit to make it palatable or feasible for builders to build in areas where we want them to build. So I don't know too much in detail about low-income tax credits, but I think by tinkering with it and making it palatable for a for-profit developer, we might be able to move policy a little bit.
You are speaking the language of many across the state. You are clairvoyant in that sense. There's a lot that echo that sentiment. So we speak with Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman, Senator Booker, Senator Menendez about this issue quite often, about how we can incentivize more, how we can use New Jersey as a model to kind of bring about more opportunities from a federal level, because we know that Jersey, to a certain extent, they have the governor, say he's handcuffed in terms of how much he can do. So we are working with some of our federal legislators to do just that. So yes, that idea is on the table. We are working to see how we can make that happen. That low income tax credit is always a subject of conversation, and how it's such even moving it a little bit has that millions and billions of dollars of ripples. So, it's such a careful dance that we have to do. But yes, that is one of the ideas that we're working on, and hopefully with this administration, we can make that happen.
Elisa, thanks for sharing your skill set and knowledge. So I guess, James, I'm back to where we started about actionable possibilities. I guess it sounds like being aware, paying attention, and bringing it to you and others who are in position to do something. Elisa mentioned something that I was going to ask earlier. What is there synergy between the Federal Housing Act and how you could use it for your advantage, in New Jersey?
We're working with Secretary Fudge was here in New Jersey maybe about a month and a half ago. She was here in Camden and some other areas where she was traveling to look at some of the federal housing units here in the state. But Secretary Fudge and Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman have a tremendous relationship. So we are working with her to not only work through new legislation, but also add amendments to current HUD regulations to kind of mitigate some of the issues that we're discussing. So the answer is yes. Secretary Fudge she is a housing champion. She's fully aware, and she's actually assembled a pretty amazing team that we think is actually going to undo some of the ills from the previous administration, and to create some new synergy around some things that need to happen. So her first couple of months has been wrapped around undoing some of the ills of the 45 administration, and reinstating some of the things from the Obama administration. And now, once you cross those off, then she can actually build upon some of the things that our two administrations ago, our 44th administration, actually wanted to achieve.
Thanks. And if that happens, it's going to help you. It's going to help your cause.
Yeah, absolutely. We're actually looking to do a federal housing criminal background check ban and box. So hopefully that will come into fruition as well.
Excellent.
Any other thoughts? I mean, but I would say to Diversity United, us and our audience, between what James conveyed to us tonight, along with what Ryan Haygood had discussed with us a few months ago, I mean, if we as a group, as a community, are committed to trying to make a difference. I mean, housing is an obvious area, which will actually, over time, possibly solve some of the ills around the wealth gap and generational wealth. What do we do? What do we do to support that? It's a rhetorical question, honestly. So if there's no other thoughts or questions, James, unbelievably informative. Thank you. You were unbelievably informative the first time we talked with Len, you and I. But yeah.
Thank you for having me. Staying on to 8 o'clock on a Tuesday. Tuesday night. I lose track of these days. COVID has kind of made everything merge together. Rabbi, thank you so much for the generous introduction. Please provide my well wishes to Ms. Crump. I hope she has a speedy and healthy recovery. Eric, please feel free to share my email and contact information with your group. I am a resource. We are looking to make headway. We're looking to create a New Jersey. We don't want what it used to look like before the pandemic. We know we can do better, but it takes groups like you, like-minded individuals, and just to be candid, it takes people that don't look like me to champion these issues, to walk in lockstep with this and let us know that like-minded people want to see New Jersey to be inclusive, diverse, equal, just. Like those are things that should be applicable to all. That shouldn't just be issues that are related to African Americans and minorities. That should be for all New Jerseyans, but we all have to kind of champion those issues. So I hope I can count on you guys, and I hope I can be a resource. I want this to be a real relationship where you guys can call on me and I can call on you, and we can make things happen, because we want to get things done. And for me, it always goes better when I have the community behind me. The community is where the power is. Legislators just temporarily hold the authority.
I mean, we're definitely interested in continuing the dialogue. We got our ace in the hole, Lynn Sanders, out there, so we will definitely stay in touch. Rabbi, I'd just like to thank Rabbi Funay, one of our co-founders of Diversity United, and the audience. This is our 5th month, I think, and many of you have been on for almost all of them. So I thank you for that, and I think I'm learning. I'm getting more up to speed, and that was the goal. I'd also just like to James Blaney met, but I also in behind the scenes, Stephanie Nieves. Stephanie, you out there?
She's here. Come on back, Steph.
Let her be seen.
Here I am. The other computer doesn't have a camera or a microphone, so we switch back and forth when James wants to say something. So, but
Okay.
here I am.
We can't see you, but I could attest that it's been a real joy. She's mastered the Zoom technology we've been putting to use, and
I don't know about mastered, but we're working on it.
it's a work in progress. But to this
Yeah.
point, you've finished what you've gotten done what you needed.
Thank you, James.
And
Thank
oh,
you
there
all.
you are. And then Jeff Havison, where are you?
Here's Jeff.
There he is. So thank
You're
you
welcome.
to Jeff and Stephanie. I'll talk to James about this. Jeff put together a really impressive monthly resource page. There's some really powerful stuff in what he's been sending out, and that was through his research. So Yasha Koach, Jeff, and let's keep trying to move forward. So thank you all, and I think our next program is August 17th. Black churches